Catherine gazed at her reflection in the mirror, her green eyes shining with a mix of love and doubt. Clad in an elegant wedding dress, she seemed the epitome of happiness. But deep down in her heart, there was a slight foreboding she couldn't shake off. James, her groom, stood beside her, smiling. He was charming, handsome, and charismatic. He seemed like the perfect man, but there was something amiss. James was an ambitious man. He had grown up in modest surroundings, always dreaming of a life of luxury and comfort. When he met Catherine, the heiress to a vast fortune, he saw his opportunity. She was sweet and generous, and she fell for him quickly. James, in turn, saw in her a means to achieve his own goals. On the big day, the wedding was a lavish celebration, filled with important guests, stunning flowers, and an atmosphere of opulence. Catherine was radiant, but the presence of Emily, a co-worker of James, did not go unnoticed. Emily, with her furtive glances and conspiratorial laughter, was a constant shadow throughout the event. As the vows were exchanged, Catherine felt a twinge of insecurity. James's words were perfect, but there was a sincerity missing that she couldn't quite name. When he looked into her eyes and promised to love and honor her, there was a hidden coldness behind his warm smile. The first few months of marriage were a dream for Catherine. They traveled the world, stayed in the best hotels, and dined at the most expensive restaurants. However, Emily's constant presence, always close to James, began to bother Catherine. She felt invisible, as if she were losing the person she loved to someone else, a silent pain settling in her heart. Meanwhile, James became increasingly involved with Emily, exploiting Catherine's fortune to maintain his mistress in a luxurious lifestyle. He justified his absences and frequent travels as part of his work commitments, while in reality, he was with Emily. Catherine began to feel a growing emptiness. Her initial happiness was replaced by lonely nights and silent tears. She tried to confront James about her suspicions, but he always had a ready excuse, deflecting her concerns with shallow kisses and empty promises. Slowly, the truth began to unravel before her. James's lies, Emily's constant presence, and the feeling of betrayal kept piling up, turning Catherine's life into a whirlwind of pain. She felt trapped in a loveless marriage, where her feelings and tears were ignored. The feeling of suffocation and despair grew with each passing day. The contrast between the love Catherine felt and James's coldness was overwhelming. Every affectionate gesture she offered was met with indifference. Her loneliness was crushing, and the certainty that she had married a man who didn't love her but her fortune destroyed her from within. One morning, Catherine rose feeling a strange fatigue she had never experienced before. Her once vibrant and lively body now felt heavy, as if carrying an invisible burden. After weeks of escalating discomfort, she decided to see a doctor, hoping it was just the result of the stress and sadness that had become her constant companions. When the test results arrived, Catherine felt her world collapse. The doctor, with a serious and compassionate look, delivered the news her heart feared to hear. She had a rare and aggressive cancer. The words reverberated in her mind, echoing like a nightmare that refused to end. She returned home, the pain of the news still raw, hoping to find some comfort in James. Upon arrival, she found James on the phone with Emily, laughing and chatting animatedly. When he finally hung up, she tried to talk about her diagnosis, seeking some support, some form of solace. However, James's response was a cold blow. He listened, but his gaze was empty, distant. Instead of offering a friendly shoulder, he merely muttered something about needing to go to work, leaving her alone with her devastation. Catherine's loneliness and despair intensified. Her nights became even lonelier, filled only with the sound of her silent tears and the buzz of overwhelming silence. She wondered how a life that began with so much love and hope could crumble so brutally. James's coldness was a constant reminder of her own vulnerability and the betrayal that gnawed at her heart. Every visit to the doctor was a test of her emotional resilience. Alone, she faced the consultations and treatments, wishing James were by her side, holding her hand. But he never was. His absences were filled with vague excuses and Emily's increasingly frequent presence in his life. Catherine saw her own existence wither as James's bond with Emily flourished. In one of these moments of fragility, Catherine decided she could not let James destroy what remained of her dignity. She reached out to Michael, a longtime friend and the father of her secret son, David. With a voice choked with pain, she revealed the truth about her marriage, her illness, and her suspicions about James. Michael, moved by Catherine's courage and suffering, promised to help her protect David and honor her final wishes. From that moment on, Catherine's determination grew. Even as her health deteriorated, she began to plan carefully, seeking to ensure that her inheritance was protected from James and that David was safe. Her love for her son and her friendship with Michael gave her a new strength, a light in the darkness of her life. But the pain did not relent. With each passing day, the disease advanced, and Catherine found herself growing increasingly fragile. James's harsh words, his absences, and Emily's constant presence were like daggers in an already torn heart. She felt her body and spirit weaken, but her mind remained steadfast in ensuring that her legacy went to David. On a particularly painful night, Catherine sat alone in her room, looking at a photo of David. With tears streaming down her face, she promised herself that no matter how much she suffered, she would do everything in her power to secure her son's future. Weeks turned into months, and Catherine's condition only worsened. Each new treatment seemed more painful than the last, and James's presence, or rather, his absence, was an open wound. She spent endless nights thinking of David, her son, and how to ensure he was protected after her departure. It was during one of those sleepless nights, amidst her reflections and growing physical pain, that Catherine decided to take action. She knew James didn't truly care about her, and his only motivation was the inheritance. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and called her lawyer, determined that it was time to rewrite her will. The next day, Catherine gathered her last remaining strength and went to the lawyer's office. Seated in a brown leather armchair, she observed the folders and documents before her. The atmosphere was austere, but the seriousness of the moment gave her a strange sense of peace. She explained her situation to the lawyer in detail, every word laden with pain and determination. "I want everything to go to my son David," Catherine said, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "James can't touch a penny of this inheritance. He doesn't deserve it." The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew how much this decision cost Catherine, both emotionally and physically. They spent hours reviewing the details, ensuring there were no loopholes James could exploit. Every signature, every added clause was a blow against the betrayal and indifference Catherine had endured for so long. When the new will was finally finalized, Catherine felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief knowing that David would be protected, and sadness for all that she had lost. She looked out the office window, seeing the New York skyline etched against the sky. The city seemed indifferent to her pain, a cruel reflection of James's indifference. Back in her apartment, Catherine felt exhaustion overwhelm her. She knew she had made the right decision, but it didn't lessen the constant pain she felt. That night, as she lay in bed, her body weak and tired, she thought of Michael and David. They were her light in the darkness, the reason she kept fighting. Days later, she met Michael at a discreet cafe. The look of concern on his face was evident. He held Catherine's hands tenderly, feeling the fragility of her skin. Catherine told him about the new will and the drastic change she had made. "Michael, you have to ensure that David receives everything that is rightfully his," she said, her voice faltering as silent tears rolled down her face. "I don't trust James. He will do anything to take what isn't his." With tears in his eyes, Michael promised to take care of everything. He understood the depth of Catherine's sacrifice and was determined to honor that trust. The bond between them strengthened with each passing moment, a friendship forged in the fire of adversity. As Catherine bid farewell to Michael, a strange feeling came over her. Emily's constant presence and James's increasingly erratic behavior worried her. She knew he wouldn't give up easily, and things could get even more complicated. The anxiety and fear of leaving David unprotected haunted her, but the hope and trust in Michael gave her the strength to continue. The following days were a mix of agonizing waiting and growing fear. Catherine felt that each moment could be her last, and the uncertainty of what James might do consumed her. She tried to find peace in the few moments of tranquility, but the shadow of betrayal and uncertainty was never far away. Catherine's life was marked by deep pain, a constant struggle against illness and betrayal. But even amidst it all, there was a flame of hope that she refused to let extinguish. Catherine, already weakened by the disease, realized that time was running out. The pains became increasingly intense, and her once strong and vibrant body now seemed like a fragile shell on the verge of breaking. The treatment was a daily battle, and with each session, she felt as if a part of her soul was being ripped away. James, on the other hand, was becoming more absent. His indifference was like a sharp knife, cutting through any remnants of hope Catherine might have had about his love. He spent more time with Emily, leaving Catherine alone in a cold and silent apartment. The nights were the worst. Catherine curled up in bed, desperately craving some human warmth, but finding only darkness and emptiness. One particular night stood out in her memory. Catherine, exhausted and in pain, heard the front door open. Her heart skipped, thinking perhaps James had returned to her. But instead she heard laughter and whispers. James entered the room with Emily by his side, both laughing and completely ignoring Catherine's presence. "James, please." Catherine tried to speak, but her voice came out as a weak whisper. James gave her a cold look. "Not now, Catherine. I'm Busse." Emily laughed, her voice dripping with contempt. "Come on, James. Let's leave her alone." Catherine felt a wave of humiliation and despair. The woman who had once been her friend was now complicit in her pain. Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she listened to the sounds of laughter and conversation coming from the next room. She was alone in her own home, betrayed and ignored. In the days that followed, Catherine felt her strength diminish even further. She could barely get out of bed, and moments of mental clarity were few and far between. Every breath was a struggle, and the sight of James and Emily enjoying themselves while she withered away was a constant torment. Michael, true to his commitment, visited Catherine whenever he could. He brought David with him, and the presence of her son brought a rare comfort to Catherine. But even these moments were tinged with sadness, as she knew she wouldn't be there to see her son grow up. Michael tried to be strong for her, but Catherine could see the pain in his eyes. One afternoon, while Michael was present, Catherine decided it was time to confront James. With a strength she didn't know she still possessed, she called James into the room. He entered, annoyed at being interrupted. "Catherine, what is it now?" "I'm Busse." "James," said Catherine, her voice weak but determined, "I changed the will." James froze, his face contorted in anger. "What? What have you done?" "David. He's my son, and I've left everything to him. You won't get anything." James lunged at her, his face twisted with fury. "You can't do this. This inheritance is rightfully mine." Michael stepped between them, holding James by the shoulders. "Enough, James. You're not entitled to anything." The tension in the room was palpable. Catherine, despite the pain and weakness, felt a strange peace. She had done what was necessary to protect David. James's reaction confirmed her suspicions. He never loved her. His only interest was the money. James stormed out of the room in a rage, leaving Catherine exhausted but resolved. She looked at Michael and David, knowing that, despite everything, she had done what was right. The tension in Catherine's apartment was almost unbearable. The words she had spoken to James reverberated through the space, creating an atmosphere heavy with uncertainty and fear. James had stormed out in blind fury, but Catherine knew he wouldn't stay idle. He was a determined and ambitious man, and he wouldn't easily give up on the fortune he believed was rightfully his. In the days that followed, Catherine gathered the little strength she had left to meet with Michael again. They sat in the living room, the silence interrupted only by the soft sounds of David playing in the room next door. Michael watched Catherine with concern, noticing the growing fragility in her appearance. "Michael," Catherine began, her voice a tired whisper, "I need to tell you everything. I need you to know every detail of the plan." Michael nodded, holding Catherine's hand firmly. "I'm here, Catherine. We'll do this together." Catherine began to describe her plan meticulously. She had left specific instructions in the will to protect David and ensure that James couldn't easily contest it. She had also set up an emergency fund, controlled by Michael, to ensure that David would be taken care of regardless of what happened. The words came out with difficulty, each one laden with pain and determination. "I know James will fight this," Catherine said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But I trust you, Michael. You have to make sure David stays safe." Michael, with tears in his eyes, promised to do everything in his power. He felt the weight of the responsibility, but he also knew he couldn't fail. Catherine was putting her faith in him, and he wouldn't let her down. The pain of seeing his friend in such a weakened state was overwhelming, but it also fueled his determination. As they talked, a loud knock on the door interrupted them. Catherine's heart raced. She knew James wouldn't take long to react, but the speed with which he had returned was frightening. Michael rose, taking a deep breath before opening the door. James stood there, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and determination. "I want to talk to Catherine." "Now," James demanded, pushing the door open. Michael blocked the entrance, his stance firm. "You've said enough, James. Catherine needs to rest." James glanced over Michael's shoulder, his eyes fixed on Catherine. "This isn't over, Catherine. I will fight for this inheritance. Do you think you can just cut me out of the will and get away with it?" Catherine, summoning all the strength she could muster, looked James directly in the eyes. "You're not entitled to anything, James. David is my son, and I will do everything to protect him." The tension between the three was palpable. Michael held his ground, determined to protect Catherine from any verbal or physical attack. James backed off, but not without casting a look filled with promises of revenge. He left, slamming the door behind him, and Catherine felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The following days were a mix of relief and fear. Catherine knew the battle was only just beginning. James, being who he was, wouldn't give up without a fight. She tried to cherish the quiet moments with Michael and David, but the specter of the impending dispute hung constantly over them. Catherine trusted Michael, but the uncertainty about David's future haunted her. She spent hours looking at old photos, reminiscing about the times before everything fell apart. Every smile from David, every moment of past happiness, was both a source of comfort and a sharp pain in her heart. Meanwhile, James began mobilizing his resources, consulting lawyers and preparing his own plan to contest the will. He knew he had to be careful, but his determination to claim the inheritance was unwavering. The anger he felt towards Catherine turned into a cold, calculated drive to ensure he emerged victorious. Catherine, in turn, tried to prepare David for the future. She knew he was too young to fully understand, but she wanted him to know how much she loved him and how hard she was fighting for him. The days continued to pass, and Catherine's health deteriorated rapidly. Pain became a constant presence, a cruel reminder of her frailty. Each breath was a struggle, and moments of relief were rare and fleeting. Yet, even amidst this immense suffering, Catherine held on to her determination. She had to ensure David's safety. Michael was a pillar of strength for her, visiting every day, bringing comfort and support. He cared for David with equal dedication, trying to create a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. Catherine saw how much Michael endeavored, and it gave her a painful hope. She knew that, despite everything, there were people who truly loved and cared for her. One night, Catherine lay in bed, feeling weaker than ever. The pain was unbearable, and she knew the end was near. She called Michael to her room, her voice a barely audible whisper. He approached, holding her hand carefully, feeling the fragility of her bones beneath her skin. "Michael," she began, her eyes filled with tears, "take care of David. He needs you." Michael nodded, his own eyes moist. "I promise, Catherine. I'll take care of him as if he were my own son." Catherine smiled weakly, feeling a small relief amid the pain. "Thank you for everything." That night, Catherine had a dream. She was in an open field, the sun shining above, and David was running around her, laughing. Michael was there too, watching with a warm smile. It was a moment of pure happiness, without pain, without fear. But upon waking, reality hit her like a blow. The pain was back, more intense than ever. James was out that night, likely with Emily, oblivious to Catherine's suffering. She was alone, except for Michael and David. Michael sat by her bedside, holding her hand, offering silent comfort. Catherine looked at him, trying to memorize his face, the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his smile. The hours passed slowly, each minute an eternity. Catherine felt life slipping from her body, but she also felt a growing peace. She had done everything she could to protect her son. Now she had to trust in Michael in the future. With a final sigh, she closed her eyes, feeling the love of Michael and David around her. Catherine's death was a devastating blow to Michael and David. Michael held her cold, lifeless body, tears freely streaming down his face. He knew he had to be strong for David, but the loss was overwhelming. David, still too young to fully understand, felt his mother's absence as a deep and inexplicable void. The funeral was a simple ceremony, yet full of emotion. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects, but James's presence was like a dark shadow over the event. He was there with Emily by his side, his face closed and impassive. For him, Catherine's death was an inconvenience, a complication to his plans to inherit. As Catherine's coffin was lowered into the ground, Michael held David's hand, feeling the weight of the responsibility now on his shoulders. He knew the battle was just beginning. James wouldn't give up easily, and he would have to fight with all his might to protect David and honor Catherine's memory. After the funeral, James and Emily went straight to the lawyer's office. The reading of the will was a tense moment, with all eyes on the lawyer. When he announced that most of Catherine's inheritance would go to David, James's reaction was explosive. He stood up abruptly, protesting, his voice full of anger and disbelief. "This is absurd. This inheritance is rightfully mine," James shouted, ignoring the disapproving looks around him. Michael, keeping calm with difficulty, responded firmly. "Catherine did what she thought was right. You have no right to anything, James." The tension in the room was palpable. James stormed out angrily, promising to contest the will. Michael knew the legal battle would be long and difficult, but he was determined to win. He couldn't allow Catherine's sacrifice to be in vain. The pain of her loss was a powerful fuel, feeding his determination to protect David at all costs. In the following days, the house Catherine had turned into a home felt empty and desolate. Michael and David leaned on each other, trying to find solace in each other's company. Catherine's memories were everywhere, every object, every corner of the house a painful reminder of her absence. Michael spent hours in Catherine's room, organizing her belongings, trying to find a way to keep her presence alive. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but the promise he made to Catherine gave him strength. He was determined to fight, not just for the inheritance, but for David's future. Michael held David's small hand as they walked to the lawyer's office. The weight of responsibility and the memory of the promise made to Catherine were still fresh in his mind. He knew that day would mark the beginning of a grueling battle. The pain of Catherine's loss was an open wound, but the determination to protect David and honor her memory was what kept him going. Entering the lawyer's office, the atmosphere felt charged, thick with the anticipation of what was to come. James was already there alongside Emily, their faces marked by impatience and barely contained anger. Michael squeezed David's hand, offering him a reassuring smile, though his own heart was racing. The lawyer began reading the will, his voice firm, filling the silent room. With each clause read, the tension mounted. When it finally came to the most crucial part, the room seemed to hold its breath. Regarding the inheritance of Catherine Smith, the majority of the assets and properties will be allocated to her son, David Smith, under the guardianship of Michael Anderson. James couldn't contain his fury. He stood up abruptly, the chair falling with a thud that echoed through the small space. "This is an outrage. I'm her husband. This inheritance should be mine." The lawyer maintained composure, but Michael could see surprise in his eyes. Emily tried to calm James, but his anger was uncontrollable. He advanced towards the lawyer's table, his expression menacing. "You will contest this," he demanded, his voice dripping with venom. "I won't let a stranger walk away with what's rightfully mine." Struggling to keep calm, Michael stepped forward, placing himself between James and the lawyer. James, Catherine's decision was clear. She wanted David to be cared for and protected. "You have no right to contest that." James glared at him, eyes full of contempt. "We'll see about that in court," he growled, before storming out of the office in a rage, with Emily hurrying after him. The room fell silent for a moment, before the lawyer continued, concluding the reading of the will. Michael felt a mix of relief and concern. He knew James wouldn't give up easily, and the ensuing battle would be exhausting and grueling. But he was determined to protect David and honor Catherine's memory. In the following days, Michael began preparing for the inevitable legal battle. He consulted lawyers, gathered documents, and strengthened his position. The tension was constant, and every letter or phone call from James was a reminder of the impending war. David, meanwhile, felt his mother's absence as a constant weight. He was confused and scared, and Michael did his best to offer him comfort and security. The pain in David's eyes reflected the void left by Catherine, and Michael strove to fill that void with love and care. One night, as Michael sat in the living room, reviewing legal documents, David approached him, holding a small stuffed bear. "Uncle Michael," he said, his voice low and trembling, "is Mommy coming back?" Michael's heart broke at the question. He pulled David into his lap, embracing him tightly. "David, Mommy isn't coming back. But she loves us very much and wants us to be happy. I promised to take care of you, and I will. Always." David snuggled into Michael's arms, and together, they shared a moment of sadness and hope. Michael knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew he wasn't alone. He had David, and Catherine's memory would guide him. The legal battle began swiftly. James, relentless in his pursuit of Catherine's inheritance, hired a team of aggressive lawyers. Each day brought new threats and legal maneuvers aimed at destabilizing Michael and contesting the validity of the will. Meanwhile, Michael prepared to fight with all his might. He knew he couldn't afford to fail. David depended on him. The first hearing was scheduled, and nervousness hung in the air. Michael rose early that day, trying to disguise his anxiety with a careful routine. David was still asleep, and Michael seized the moment of silence to gather his thoughts. Sitting in the kitchen, he took a sip of coffee, feeling the weight of responsibilities resting on his shoulders. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was formal and oppressive. James was there, with Emily by his side, both exuding a cold confidence. Michael took a deep breath and entered the hearing room, determined to fight. His lawyers were prepared, but he knew it would be an uphill battle. Arguments began, each side presenting their evidence and witnesses. James claimed that Catherine wasn't in her right mind when she amended the will, trying to paint a picture of instability and manipulation. Michael, on the other hand, presented clear evidence that Catherine was completely lucid and aware of her decisions until the end. As the hearing progressed, Michael felt the tension mounting. Each of James's arguments felt like a blow, but he stood firm, remembering Catherine's words and the promise he made to her. He couldn't allow her memory to be tarnished by James's lies. In a particularly tense moment, James was called to the witness stand. He looked directly at Michael, his gaze full of disdain. "Catherine was sick and weak," he said. "She didn't know what she was doing. This man," he pointed at Michael, "manipulated her into changing the will. He wants the inheritance for himself." Anger boiled inside Michael, but he kept his composure. He knew he needed to be strong, not just for himself, but for David and Catherine's memory. When it was his turn to testify, he spoke with honesty and emotion, describing Catherine's love for David and her determination to protect him. "Catherine was fully aware of what she was doing," Michael said, his voice firm. "She wanted to ensure that her son was cared for and loved. James was never there for her. He was more interested in money than Catherine's health and happiness." The tension in the room was palpable. The lawyers on both sides continued to argue, but the truth of Michael's words resonated. He was fighting not just for justice, but for Catherine's honor and dignity. Every word, every testimony was a reaffirmation of the love and sacrifice she made for her son. At the end of the hearing, Michael left the courtroom exhausted but determined. James hadn't given up yet, but Michael felt he had made a difference. He looked at David, who awaited anxiously with an encouraging smile, and knew that no matter how tough it got, he would keep fighting. In the days that followed, the legal battle continued to escalate. James and his lawyers used every possible tactic to try to destabilize Michael, but he was prepared. Every letter, every subpoena was met with renewed determination. Michael knew he wasn't just fighting for an inheritance, but for justice and David's future. David, despite his young age, felt the tension around him. Michael did his best to shield him from the worst, but the situation was unavoidable. On a particularly difficult night, David approached Michael, his eyes filled with questions he didn't know how to answer. "Uncle Michael," David said, his voice low, "why is Daddy doing this? Why is he mad at us?" Michael held young David in his arms, feeling the boy's pain and confusion. "David, your father is trying to do something that's not right. But I promise we'll get through this together. Your mother wanted you to be happy and safe, and that's what I'll make sure of." Michael woke up that morning with a sense of foreboding. The air felt heavier, and he knew that the battle with James was far from over. The days had turned into a series of hearings and legal preparations, each one more exhausting than the last. But he couldn't give in, not while Catherine's memory and David's future were at stake. While having his coffee, Michael received an urgent call from his lawyer. "Michael, we need to talk. There's something you need to see." In the lawyer's office, Michael felt a chill run down his spine as he saw a stack of documents on the table. His lawyer looked at him seriously. "We've found something that could change everything." He opened the documents, revealing emails and messages showing James's attempts to manipulate Catherine's will. There was evidence that James had tried to bribe courthouse employees and influence legal decisions in his favor. Each page was a revelation of corruption and desperation. Michael felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at James for sinking to such a level, but relief for finally having something concrete to use against him. He knew these proofs could turn the tide of the legal battle. At the next hearing, the atmosphere was tense. James was present with his usual air of arrogance, but Michael felt a new strength within himself. When his lawyer presented the evidence of manipulation, the reaction in the room was immediate. Murmurs and shocked looks spread around. James, for a moment, seemed to lose his composure. "These are lies," James shouted, trying to defend himself. "This is a conspiracy against me." But the evidence was irrefutable. Every email, every message was a blow to James's credibility. The judge watched with a stern expression, and Michael could feel that something was changing. The scales of justice were beginning to tip in his favor. James stormed out of the courtroom in a fit of rage, but Michael knew the fight was far from over. However, this first legal victory was a ray of hope. He returned home exhausted, but with a renewed sense of determination. David was waiting for him with a hopeful smile on his face. "Uncle Michael, how was today?" David asked, his eyes wide and curious. Michael smiled, kneeling down to be at David's eye level. "It was a good day, David. We're closer to ensuring that your mother's will is honored." David hugged Michael tightly, and in that embrace, Michael felt the strength to keep going. Every victory, no matter how small, was one step closer in the right direction. He knew he couldn't let his guard down, but that night, he allowed himself a moment of relief. The following days brought a tense calm. James was quieter, but Michael knew that didn't mean he had given up. He continued to prepare for the next hearing, reviewing every detail, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. In one of the toughest moments, while reviewing documents in the middle of the night, Michael received a call from an unknown number. He answered, his heart racing. "Michael, it's Emily," said the voice on the other end of the line, full of hesitation. "I need to talk to you. Urgently." Michael felt a wave of surprise. Emily, James's accomplice, was now reaching out. What did she want? He arranged to meet her at a discreet cafe, not knowing what to expect. Uncertainty and fear mingled, but he knew he needed to find out what Emily had to say. At the meeting, Emily seemed nervous, her eyes avoiding Michael's. "I can't do this anymore," she said finally, her voice trembling. "James, he's dangerous. He forced me to do things. I can't go on." Michael watched her closely, trying to understand her intentions. "What do you mean, Emily? What did he force you to do?" Emily began to speak, revealing details of James's manipulations and threats. She talked about the bribes, the intimidations, and how he controlled her. "I can't live with this guilt anymore," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I want to help. I want to tell everything in court." Michael felt a mix of relief and suspicion. Emily was offering crucial testimony, but he knew he needed to be cautious. Still, the possibility of having Emily on his side was an unexpected and potentially decisive turn in the battle. Michael was at home, reviewing preparations for the upcoming hearing when he received a call from Emily. Tension and anxiety permeated every second as he waited nervously. When she began to speak, her voice was filled with fear and regret, and Michael realized the gravity of the situation. "James is planning something big," Emily said, her voice trembling. "He's more desperate than ever. I fear what he might do." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew James wouldn't give up easily, but hearing Emily describe his determination to bring them down brought a new wave of fear. They needed to be more prepared than ever. "Emily, are you safe? Do you need help?" "I'm okay for now," she replied. "But you need to know what he's planning. He's found a lawyer willing to do anything to win this case. They're fabricating evidence and bribing witnesses. You have to be prepared." Michael thanked Emily and hung up the phone, his heart pounding. He knew the fight was far from over, but this new information could be the key to defeating James. He immediately contacted his lawyer, sharing what he had just heard. The atmosphere in the courtroom was more tense than ever. Michael felt the pressure mounting as he awaited the start of the hearing. James was there, his face marked by a fierce and almost insane determination. Emily, sitting on the other side of the room, avoided James' gaze, clearly frightened by what was about to happen. The judge entered and everyone stood up. The hearing began, and James' lawyers began presenting their evidence. Michael could see how desperate and manipulative they were being, and his anger and frustration only grew, but he knew he had to keep calm. When it was Emily's turn to testify, the silence in the room was deafening. She took the witness stand, her hands trembling. "Emily, you are under oath," the judge said. "Please tell the truth." Emily took a deep breath and began to speak. She detailed James' plans, the manipulations, and the threats. Her voice, despite the fear, was clear and firm. Every word was a dagger plunged into James' armor. James stood up, shouting, "She's lying. Don't believe her. She's doing this to destroy me." The judge banged the gavel, ordering silence. Michael could see the fury in James' eyes, but also something more: desperation. He knew he was losing control, and that made him even more dangerous. After Emily's testimony, the courtroom seemed to be in Michael's favor. The evidence was clear, and Emily's courage in telling the truth had been a devastating blow to James. However, Michael knew the battle was far from over. As he left the courtroom, Michael saw James approaching. He was alone, anger pulsing in every muscle. "This isn't over, Michael," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I will destroy you and take what's mine." Michael remained calm, although he felt a growing fear. "You've already lost, James. Catherine made her choice, and nothing you do will change that." James backed off, but the look in his eyes promised revenge. Michael knew he needed to be more vigilant than ever. He took David home, trying to maintain a calm demeanor for the boy, but his heart was heavy with anticipation of what James might do next. In the days that followed, Michael and his lawyer worked tirelessly to bolster their defenses. They knew James would try other legal maneuvers, and they needed to be ready for anything. Emily remained hidden, protected by friends and colleagues, but she continued to provide vital information to Michael. One night, as Michael reviewed documents in the living room, David approached, holding his stuffed bear. "Uncle Michael," he said, his voice full of innocence and curiosity. "We're safe, aren't we?" The tension mounted with each passing day. Michael was exhausted but determined to protect David and ensure Catherine's will was fulfilled. James continued to seek ways to contest the will, each move more desperate than the last. Emily, hidden in a safe location, maintained constant contact, offering any information that could help. One night, Michael was at home reviewing documents when he heard a strange noise coming from downstairs. His heart raced. Grabbing a flashlight, he carefully descended the stairs. When he reached the living room, the flashlight illuminated a figure moving furtively. It was James. "James, what are you doing here?" Michael's voice trembled with a mix of anger and fear. James turned, a malicious smile on his face. "I've come to take what's mine, Michael. You can't stop me." Before Michael could react, James lunged at him. The fight was brief but intense. James was bigger and stronger, and soon Michael found himself on the floor, trying to defend himself from the brutal blows. Pain radiated through his body, but he knew he couldn't give up. Amidst the struggle, Michael heard David's voice shouting, "Uncle Michael, stop! Please stop!" The sound of David's voice gave Michael renewed strength. He managed to dodge a blow and pushed James back with all his might, causing him to fall backwards. Seizing the opportunity, Michael got up and positioned himself between James and the stairs leading to David's room. "You're not going to hurt David," Michael said, his voice firm despite the pain. "You have no power here anymore." James, furious, tried to advance again but was interrupted by the sound of sirens. The police, alerted by a neighbor who heard the struggle, arrived quickly. James was restrained and taken away, shouting threats and curses. When the police left, Michael knelt on the floor, breathing heavily. David ran to him, tears streaming down his face. "Uncle Michael, you're hurt. We need help." Michael hugged David, trying to calm him. "I'm okay, David. Just a little hurt. It's all okay now." But Michael knew it wasn't all okay. He felt the intense pain in his ribs, and the concern for David weighed even heavier on his heart. After ensuring David was safe with a neighbor, Michael went to the hospital, where he discovered he had several broken ribs and severe bruises. As he recovered, anger and frustration grew at James's attempts to harm them, but there was also a renewed determination. He knew he needed to be more careful and was more determined than ever to protect David. Michael felt a new strength, an unwavering resolve that nothing could deter him from his goal. With Michael in the hospital, the situation seemed even more desperate. But news of James's attack strengthened Michael's legal position. The court saw James's true face and began to sympathize more with Michael and David. In the following days, as Michael recovered, he reflected on everything that had happened. Anger and sadness were present, but there was also a sense of purpose. He had promised Catherine that he would take care of David, and that promise was his driving force. He knew the battle wasn't over yet, but he was ready to face it with more determination than ever. As Michael recovered, he began to plan the next phase of his legal strategy. He knew the battle would be long and hard, but he also knew he had strong allies by his side. Emily continued to provide crucial information, and the support of friends and lawyers was unwavering. The next hearing would be decisive. Michael knew he had to be prepared for anything. He spent hours reviewing documents, preparing testimonies, and bolstering his legal defenses. Every detail was important, and he couldn't afford to make mistakes. On the day of the hearing, Michael was nervous but determined. He walked into the courtroom with his head held high, knowing he was doing this for David and Catherine. The judge called the parties and the hearing began. James, now aware that his manipulation tactics were failing, seemed more desperate than ever. His lawyers presented new arguments, but evidence of his previous actions weakened his position. Michael and his lawyers were prepared, responding to each argument calmly and clearly. Emily was called to the witness stand again. She spoke firmly, describing James's threats and manipulations. Her words were damning, and their impact was visible on everyone in the room. When it was Michael's turn to testify, he spoke from the heart. He described the promise he made to Catherine, his love for David, and his determination to protect the boy's future. His words were sincere and emotional, touching everyone present. The judge, after hearing all the arguments, called for a recess to deliberate. The silence in the room was tense, every second feeling like an eternity. When the judge returned, the verdict was clear. James would not have access to Catherine's inheritance. Most of the assets would be allocated to David, under Michael's guardianship. The victory in court brought a brief moment of relief, but Michael knew the battle was far from over. James, furious and humiliated, was more dangerous than ever. Michael braced himself for the worst, trying to stay calm for David. He knew the boy's safety was his absolute priority. A few days after the hearing, Michael was driving home from a medical appointment when a car came speeding towards him from the opposite direction. In a moment of panic, he tried to swerve, but the impact was inevitable. The world became a blur of twisted metal and pain. The sound of sirens and muffled voices filled the air as Michael lost consciousness. When he woke up in the hospital, everything was confusing. The pain in his body was overwhelming, and his first concern was David. He tried to sit up, but the pain was unbearable. Nurses and doctors rushed in, trying to calm him down. "David? Where's David?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse and desperate. A nurse held his hand. "He's safe, Michael. He's with family friends. You need to rest and recover." Michael felt a momentary relief, but the worry for David's safety and the suspicion that the accident wasn't just a coincidence consumed him. He knew James was behind this. It was a desperate attempt to get him out of the way. During the weeks of recovery, Michael was visited by Emily. She seemed nervous and concerned, clearly aware of what was happening. "Michael, James is becoming more unpredictable. He's desperate." Michael, in pain and still recovering, looked at her with determination. He tried to kill me, Emily. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. We need to act before he does something even worse." Emily nodded, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her. "I'll keep helping. I'll do whatever I can to keep David safe." Michael's return home was a mix of relief and tension. He was greeted with warm hugs from David, who was visibly worried. "Uncle Michael, are you going to be okay?" Michael forced a smile, trying to reassure the boy. "Yes, David. I'll be fine. We're in this together." But James's threats hung over them like a constant shadow. Michael doubled the security measures around the house, keeping a vigilant eye on every suspicious movement. The tension was always present, and each day was an emotional battle to stay calm for David. One night, while Michael was reviewing legal documents at the kitchen table, he heard a noise from outside. His heart raced, and he grabbed a flashlight and a gun he kept for protection. As he stepped out, the darkness was total, except for the faint glow of the flashlight. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm despite the growing fear. Suddenly, someone moved in the shadows. Michael pointed the flashlight and saw James's figure, with a malicious smile on his face. "I warned you this isn't over, Michael. You can't stop me." Before Michael could react, James rushed towards him. But this time Michael was prepared. He dodged and managed to push James against the wall, keeping the gun steady. "It's over, James. The police are on their way." James laughed, a disturbing sound in the darkness. "You think you can win, Michael? This is just the beginning." But Michael didn't back down. The police arrived quickly, and James was taken away once again, shouting threats and promises of revenge. Michael knew their safety was still at risk, but he felt a renewed determination. He wouldn't let James's terror control their lives. The following weeks were intense and filled with uncertainties, but they also brought a sense of renewal and hope. James, now in prison and facing a series of charges, could no longer pose a direct threat. However, the shadow of his actions still loomed over Michael and David, affecting every aspect of their lives. Michael was determined to rebuild their lives, but the emotional scars ran deep. David, though young, felt the loss of his mother and the turmoil that followed. Michael devoted himself to providing a safe and loving environment for him, knowing that healing would take time. One afternoon, while Michael was sitting on the couch, David approached with a photo album he had found. "Uncle Michael, can we look at these pictures of Mom?" Michael smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. "Of course, David. Let's remember the good times." They spent hours flipping through the album, laughing and crying together. Each photo was a reminder of Catherine's love, her strength, and the happiness she brought into their lives. Michael felt a wave of emotions, from profound sadness for the loss to gratitude for the moments they shared. "She was so happy, wasn't she?" David said, his eyes shining with tears. "Yes, David. Your mom was an amazing woman, and she loved you more than anything in this world. She did all of this to ensure you had a good life." David looked at Michael, his face filled with determination. "I want to be strong like her. I want to do something good with her inheritance." Michael hugged David tightly. "And you will, David. Together, we'll honor her memory and ensure that her legacy makes a difference." Over time, Michael and David began using Catherine's inheritance to support causes that were important to her. They founded a charity organization in her name, focused on helping families of cancer patients, offering emotional and financial support. It was their way of keeping Catherine alive in their actions and in their hearts. The final legal battles were won with the help of crucial testimonies, including Emily's, who continued to provide vital support. James was convicted for his actions, finally receiving the justice he deserved. Though there were still remnants of fear and trauma, Michael and David could finally begin to rebuild their lives without James's constant threat. Michael found strength in the promise he made to Catherine and in the unbreakable bond he shared with David. Each day was a step towards healing, And each challenge overcome strengthened their bonds even more. They learned to find joy in the little things, to cherish moments of happiness, and to remember that, despite all the pain, they had each other. One night, as they gazed at the stars in the garden, David asked, "Do you think Mom is watching us, Uncle Michael?" Michael smiled, looking up at the starry sky. "Yes, David. I think she's always with us, watching over us. And she's very proud of you." David smiled, feeling comforted. "I miss her every day. But I know she's happy because we're doing what she wanted." Michael hugged David, feeling a profound peace. "Yes, we are. And we'll continue to do so, honoring her memory in everything we do."